Hi everyone, hi YouTube. Time for some economics discussion. Last week I briefly discussed some of the strategy of bringing together a large group of people in support of a wealth tax and sort of honing the messaging that would be effective for getting that group together and on the same page. This week I thought it would be a good idea to look at some of the arguments against wealth tax and against taxes in general and see if we can't find some weaknesses in those arguments. The first argument that I want to talk about is this idea that taxation is theft and nobody should pay taxes, taxes shouldn't be a thing. I think that this is a pretty naive argument, to be honest with you. And even if you were correct morally to say that taxation is theft, and I'll give you that. Let's just say that it is. It's morally equivalent. I don't see a political platform that is going to be able to successfully abolish taxation. If you are watching this video, you are probably watching from a country that has a state, not in the sense of like United States, but as in the sense of like a government and people in power. That state is going to impose taxes in order to self-perpetuate. So really the only way that you could abolish taxation is by abolishing the state. And to abolish the state, you would need to get essentially a group of statesmen, a group of people in power in the government who were suddenly interested in no longer having any power. And that seems like a pretty tough ask. Um, so, yeah, I don't see that happening. Now, if you wanted to say that, well, some taxation is inevitable, but we should have as little of it as possible because, like, less of a bad thing is better than a lot of a bad thing. I will point out that at least here in the United States, all of the efforts to reduce taxation have ended up primarily benefiting the politician class belong to. So when people get into office to cut taxes, they typically cut their own taxes and not everybody else's. Okay, so another argument that I've heard is that if we tax the ultra wealthy, all that'll do is make them move and go to other countries, and then they won't be paying taxes anyway because they'll be, a resident of another country, and then they'll also take the jobs and opportunities that they've built with them when they go. So let's cut this argument in half. Let's talk about avoiding taxation by moving first, and then we'll talk about the job loss afterward. So let's start with the idea that they're going to go somewhere else and avoid paying taxes that way. Well, the thing that we're taxing is wealth, and wealth is tied up in physical assets that exist in the world. They're not, zeros and ones in a bank account. They are office buildings and homes and apartment complexes and hospitals. So it's pretty tough to take that with you when you leave the country. I think that we will still be able to tax those assets and that infrastructure, even if the person who owns them leaves the country. So, for instance, if you own a bunch of mortgages for homes that exist in the United States of America, and then you move to the Bahamas and you say, well, I'm not a U.S. citizen, so don't tax me. Well, your wealth is still in the United States, so it's still subject to tax. Okay, so the second part of the argument is that when these ultra wealthy people leave, they're going to take the opportunities and the jobs that they create with them to wherever they go. And this is sort of based on the supposition that ultra wealthy people are job creators in the first place. I think that supposition is only partially correct. Job creation happens because of entrepreneurs who identify a gap in the market and find a way to change labor into something that a consumer will want to buy. Now, some of these ultra wealthy people are ultra wealthy entrepreneurs, but also a lot of them got their riches not from creating jobs, but actually destroying them. and not necessarily in a bad way, just by making their industry more efficient so that less labor was required to get the same end product. If you think about, for instance, the rise of the supermarket, right? It used to be that when you went to go get your weekly groceries, you would go to a bunch of small businesses, you would make a bunch of separate transactions, and that ended. It was inefficient. So we grouped everything all together in one store. You pick out everything that you want, you go up to the cash register, you make one transaction, and then you go home. And it's a more efficient process. And I'm not saying that it's worse than having all of those separate small businesses, but it certainly does have fewer jobs. It's not an enterprise that creates jobs, it actually reduces the total number of jobs in the market. The one thing that I think really does have a high impact on jobs is the propensity of an average person, an ordinary person, to spend money. If an ordinary person feels like they are too pressured from their essential spending to spend on any luxury or any convenience, then there is less room in the market for those entrepreneurs to come up with new products or design new services that people might enjoy. That's why I think a wealth tax is actually a win here, because as we've talked about in other videos, we have an increased cost of living. Every year it's getting more and more expensive for ordinary people to make it, to live in a house with food, water, heating, electricity, and this increase in cost of living is being driven by an increase in asset prices. Asset prices are going up because the ultra wealthy don't have anything else to spend their money on except for assets. So what we need to do is stabilize inequality so that we can stabilize the price of assets, which will in turn stabilize the cost of things like rent and utilities for ordinary folks, so that their wages can start to catch up to the enormous cost of living increase that we've seen year over year over the past 35, 40 years. So another argument that I saw was that if you increase taxation, that tax money is just going to find its way into the pockets of corrupt politicians. And I will half agree with you because I think that corruption, at least in American politics, is rampant and a really big problem that we need to address. So how we make our government less corrupt is basically a two-part problem. The first part is to address the influence that money plays in politics, campaign finance reform, stuff that makes it illegal for large either corporations or individuals to make incredibly large contributions to campaigns in order to, blanket the media with ads and essentially win through overwhelming force of media presence rather than through really representing the people. The second part is a little bit trickier because I think it's actually our responsibility. It is the responsibility of ordinary people to be more involved and more engaged with the political process instead of just voting for president every 4 years if we feel like it. One of the things that I've tried to stress to younger folks, people who are 18, 19, able to vote for the first time, is that one of the reasons that your demographic isn't really considered seriously when it comes to driving public policy is because as a demographic you have very, very low voter participation, and so there's not really a strong drive for any politicians to address any of your concerns seriously because it's unlikely to actually get them a vote when it comes to the election. So if you want to be considered, the bare minimum is you've got to vote consistently. One of the lessons that I took from my dad was that you're probably not going to get anything that you're not willing to put in effort for. And so I think that is true for our power in politics as well. If we are content to just be comfortable and let the ruling class figure it out for us, then we're not going to get anything that we want. We have to be active and involved. We have to put in the effort. And we're actually quite fortunate, those of us who are U.S. citizens and eligible to vote, that we have a political process that allows us to have a voice in politics. A lot of folks are not so lucky. The last argument that I saw was basically, I've worked hard for my money. I paid income tax on the money that I made. I don't want to have to pay another tax on the wealth that I have. So for one, you probably already are. If you own a home, or even if you just own a car, which most Americans do, you are paying a tax for the privilege of ownership. You are already paying a wealth tax in the form of your property taxes each year. That's not going to the federal government, it's going to local governments, but it's still going to pay for stuff like roads and schools and whatnot. The second part is that this particular wealth tax that I'm advocating for is an effort to reduce wealth inequality from the very, very richest to everybody else. So if your assets are worth less than $50 million, then you wouldn't be affected. If your assets are worth $50 million or more, you're probably not watching this YouTube video. You have much better things to do with your time. So yeah, the goal of this sort of a wealth tax would be reducing wealth inequality from the top 1% and everybody else. And the reason that we're doing that is not because we want to punish success, it's because those 1% are driving up the cost of assets. The rising asset cost is creating a cost of living crisis, which leaves ordinary people without money to spend, which is terrible for the economy. It creates an environment where entrepreneurs cannot create products for ordinary people. They can only create those products for people with a lot of money already. Okay, so that's the video for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, all the things that let YouTube know that this video is worth watching, and I'll see you again next week.